Welcome to this presentation on sport along the River Wandle. My name is Mick Taylor and I'm a volunteer of the Wandle Industrial Museum. We are based in Mitcham, Surrey, and been there since 1992. And it is our temporary home. We're hoping to move into a mill building at some point. This talk is all about the banks of the River Wandle and the sport that took place along it. It wasn't all about mills and it wasn't all about works. It has been used for leisure and other activities over its years. What I would like to start with is to look at some of the stadiums that were along the banks of the River Wandle. Not only those that have now gone, but also some of the newer ones that have now appeared. Let's start with Wimbledon Stadium and Plough Lane. Wimbledon Stadium was there from 1928 up to 2017, and that's the one in the foreground here. Plough Lane ground, which you can see in the background, the upper part of the picture, was the home of Wimbledon FC, or as some football fans call it. Actually, they moved and became franchised Milton Keynes. Wimbledon FC were in fact there from 1912 to 1991. In the centre of the picture, you can actually see Wimbledon Mill, which is now the electricity substation. It's quite a marshy land around here, and it was prone to flooding. In fact, flooding did happen around the stadium in particular. No, not directly from the River Wandle that flows through the middle of this picture, but in fact from a stream that actually came down from Springfield Hospital in Tooting and led down through Somerstown and through the stadium into the River Wandle. The stadium itself was used for a number of variety of things. Stock cars ran there from about 1962 up to about 2008. In fact, it was the London Low Emission Zone that actually is said to have brought an end to the stock cars in this area. Speedway took place from in between 1928, when the stadium opened, up until 1991, and again from 2002 to 2005. And greyhounds actually raced there also from the start of the opening of the stadium from 1928, right up until 2017. Stadium was owned by the Greyhound Racing Association until 2007. When Gallion Homes Limited took it over. AFC Wimbledon bid for it, having started up, and it was finally demolished in 2017. This is the Wimbledon FC Plough Lane Stadium on the left-hand side. Next to the Wandle, as I said, the Wimbledon FC were there from 1912 until 1991. And before they went on to actually ground share with Crystal Palace. Then they became Milton Keynes, and then finally they're known today as MK Dons. Completely different team from the one that was there at Wimbledon. AFC Wimbledon was formed in 2002. They played on Wimbledon Common, and before they moved back to Merton and back to this new stadium on the right, they were playing at Kingstonian's ground, which is now used by Chelsea's women's team. And they always look to return to Merton. And they've eventually opened this new ground known as the Cherry Red Records Stadium in 2020, which they actually share with London Broncos. Another stadium in the area was also belonged to Somerstown FC. They played in the Athenian League from 1914 up until 1928. The stand that you can actually see on the right-hand side, slightly hidden under a tree, was actually sold to Wealdstone FC. Wealdstone FC played at Lower Mead in Harrow and Wealdstone. And that eventually was sold to actually Tesco's, that stadium, and of course the stand disappeared. This ground is now covered by the Henry Prince estate. There is still a Somerstown Casual FC. They're a Sunday League team that actually play in Garrett's Park. This is Wandsworth Stadium. opened in 1933 and closed in 1966. It was primarily and only used for greyhound racing, which came to the UK in 1926 and evolved from the sport of coursing. Demolished the cut of the River Wandle that you can see in front of the stadium on the left-hand side, and clearly on the left of the picture on the right as well, was filled in. And in fact, that now forms Neville Gill Close in Wandsworth, which in fact is next door to the Southside Shopping Centre. This is Imperial Fields, the Tooting and Mitcham FC ground. This opened in 2002 after their ground at Sandy Lane in Mitcham was actually deemed to be unsafe. I am told that it was in fact used as an example for our bid for the 2012 Olympics. Stadium is right next to the Wandle at Mitcham Bridge. I'm going to move on now and start looking at some of the factories and the works along the river. They were supplying sporting goods, there was sports and social clubs, there was works teams, and they also sponsored a number of events as well. Now, this is the Viditas Gas Mentals works in Garrett Lane. You'll note that in the pictures, they refer to them as athletics teams. Their works were just south of the Old Sergeant pub on Garrett Lane in Wandsworth. And in 1972, they actually moved to Chiswick. That was following a decline in gas lighting. And they now actually produce DIY equipment and also camping products as well. This is Young's, very famous, well known for their beer, much as anything. But believe it or not, Young's had no sports or social club. They were involved with the LBASA, which is the London Brewers Amateur Sports Association, that was formed in 1922. And in 1924, there was actually 22 brewery clubs involved, taking part in inter-brewing competitions, lasting right up until the 1980s. Young's did actually have their own football team that played at King George's Sports Centre, now Wandle Recreation Centre, but a little bit more on that later. What they did do, though, Young's, was sponsorship. Inter-pub competitions, sponsored golf, bowls, cricket, rugby, and darts, really, the Battersea Town Hall. Their event there was really a forerunner to what you have these days at Alexandra Palace with the World Champion, the Arts Championships, etc. Of course, a number of celebrities involved. I'm sure you'll reckon people like Pat Phoenix and Rula Lenska in these pictures. Debbie Bowder-Sturris in the middle of the picture as well. Jimmy Greaves and Ian St. John with Mr. Young, John Young. And of course, at all these events, you can bet what did flow was the beer. This is Wangas. Wangas is actually from the Wandsworth and District Gas Company. The club now is actually based in Worcester Park. Mullards on the right-hand side there were based on the River Wandle in Mitcham from 1929 to 1980s. They were part of the Phillips Partnership from 1923 and were actually sold to Phillips in 1927. Though Phillips decided to retain the name of Mullards. And they had all kinds of sports clubs. They subsidised equipment and functions at the events. Picture on the right there, in fact, shows Mullards versus the Mitcham Works in 1950. The Mitcham Works and the Mullards shared the same site. Here we move on to what somewhat surprising one, I think, in terms of Hovis. This is the Hovis sports ground. Hovis still have a presence in Mitcham today as a distribution yard down at Willow Lane. This can actually be traced back to the 1930s here with cricket and with tennis courts. And they lasted until 1975. And it was really on an island down near Mitcham Bridge. It's now filled by housing estates, as you will see in the next pictures. And here you can see where the island is formed. If you look at the right-hand side there, you can see the River Wandle in the middle, where the dotted line is, and you can see where a channel goes just north of that, around where it says sports ground. And if you look on the left-hand side, you also see that the pavilion was actually moved. The bottom picture shows it in one position, yet it was moved to another position in the upper picture. You can also see in the main picture where the tennis courts are as well. But as I say, it's now a housing estate and been built on, and the northern channel there has in fact been filled in. Moving on, we get to what is now Merton Abbey Mills, Liberty of London Print Works. They had a sporting pavilion mainly on the West Bank, and the pavilion there, pictured in the centre, was there until the 1970s. They had tennis courts. The umpire in the chair is Harry Furman, who was actually one of the members of Merton Abbey Mills and worked there at that time when it was Liberty's. The club was actually known as the Lotus Sports Club. It was active between the wars, and it actually moved from Perivale in the 1923s. However, the club found very little support after the Second World War, and only the football team really survived. The sports ground became overgrown and was sold in the 1950s and is now part of the Lion Road industrial estate. This set of pictures from Hugh Stevenson's and Sons Limited at Somerstown, in fact stills taken from cine films. The football team on the left-hand top picture is from the 1950s, and this is Hugh Stevenson and Sons actually playing Upper Tooting at that time. The other pictures are in fact from a 1937 sports day, and you can see there's sack races down the bottom right-hand corner, tug of war in the top right, and excuse me, ladies and gents races, and we pictured the ladies race here. There were skipping races, shot put, long jumps, egg and spoon races, blindfolded races, and it's included children's races. They had, we believe, their own recreation ground on the site, which is possibly now part of Garrett Park, which was just north of the works. This is Conley Level Works. Conley's Level Works were at Collier's Wood from 1919 up until 1994. They provided seats for the Van Well racing car, which is shown on the right there. It provided racing levels, level for football and rugby balls, etc. They also had their own football team. I heard a little story of how they used to kick lumps out of everyone, but that's another tale. The Van Well F1 team was running in the 1950s, and certainly Sterling Moss was one of their drivers. This is Whiteley Products Limited. They were in fact based at Ravensbury Mill, Malden, from 1925 up until 1983. They're an American company. They produce lots of rubber goods. The things that you see on aircraft carriers, when an aircraft comes into land, it gets caught and pulled and stopped by a rubber rope across the rail. They also made chest expanders, and you can see on the top right-hand corner, perhaps there are some of you who remember Charles Atlas. He was certainly before my time, and I can't recall him, but I'm sure some of you may well remember him. And starting gates both for horse racing, though they've since been replaced, and still in use today for speedway racing as well. Now, water sports, you can't have a river without water. So if you're having water sports, then you need water. So let's have a look at some of these. Certainly boating was popular. Lots of the mills along the river had mill ponds. This is where they stored water for use later during the dry periods to actually release water to actually drive their water wheels. The top left one there, in fact, is Ravensbury Park. The top right is Wandle Park in Croydon, and the bottom one, in fact, is Beddington Park there. examples of boating lakes. Wandle Park was culverted in 1967, mainly because of lack of water, believe it or not, but it's now open again as a stream. Others were open until 1980s, but they fell into the hands of vandals, which led to their closure. Now, this is Wimbledon Park Lake. This may puzzle you why we actually include this, but Wimbledon Park Lake gets filled off of Wimbledon Common. The lake then gets filled, and the lake actually then flows into the River Wandle at Ravensbury Terrace in Wimbledon. And of course, number of sports that you can see here: paddle boarding, sailing, windsurfing, obviously swimming as well. Continuous there. Now, on the 17th of July, 1994, and these again are stills from a video that we have that you can find on our YouTube channel. Craig McCragan actually canoed along the River Wandle. Well, we also got one of our volunteers, Oriel, who at one time joined him along on that trip. We obviously often get asked the question, particularly by children, about boats on the River Wandle, and this is probably the nearest you get. Craig certainly made an effort to go along the Wandle. Some of the information he gives in his video, from an historical point of view, isn't actually 100% correct, but the video itself is quite fascinating. On the bottom right is where he actually went under Southside Shopping Centre at Wandsworth. And of course, being the River Wandle, one time the best trout fishing river in the country, you've got to have fishing. 1608, powers given to take anything that destroyed the king's fishing and game was put into place. 17th century, there was the Wandle Royal Game Preserve. And in 1623, Sir Edward Cecil, later Viscount Wimbledon, had the right to was given the job of conserving the river fish. There was rewards, fines for poaching, for fish, certainly around from 1838 onwards. Trout could be as large as £3 or even larger than others. Rights to fishing in the 1850s was very valuable. But it's good fishing now. People do enjoy fishing the River Wandle. It's certainly picked up, and it's getting back to its peak in terms of the fishing. Now, this is Wandle Park, and we're talking about swimming. I wouldn't recommend swimming in the River Wandle directly if you can avoid it, especially after heavy rain. Probably all right if you've had a week or a couple of weeks of good weather and the river's quite clear, but certainly do not use it in the raining weather. This, in fact, shows some of the swimming pools that were actually along the river. Wandle Park opened in 1920 and closed in 1932. It was next to an old mill pond that had been filled in Wandle Park in Collier's Wood. And in fact, it was later used from 1939 as an air raid shelter built around it as well and over it. Now, Carew Manor is part of the school. Swimming pool's now well gone. Did hear stories that it was green by the time it had closed. In terms of, and now use the local leisure centre, which, as it turns out, will be the Westcroft Swimming Baths and Westcroft Leisure Centre here, opened in 1976 by Michael Heseltine. Bit of a strange choice, as he was MP for Henley. So coming down into this bit of the world may well be because of his connection. But it's actually next to what is known as the Westcroft Canal that served the Grove Ironworks. The canal, in fact, got its water from Carshalton Park. Instead of the water turning left to go into the Carshalton Ponds when it hit the High Street, excuse me, it actually turned right and went to the canal. Now, this is Wandsworth Lido. Wandsworth Lido opened on the 6th of May, 1938. It was the first Wandsworth Council pool, actually opened in 1901. The Wandsworth Lido actually closed in 1993. It cost £22,386 to build, and it took 385,000 gallons of water. A paddling pool next to it actually took 28,000 gallons. And the man pictured here is actually Edward Harry Tenby, who was a channel swimmer, who was the first man to actually swim across the English Channel in both directions. The girls are from Wandsworth Swimming Club, which are still going strong today. This picture on the left actually shows the Lido in the middle part of the picture, and you can just see the paddling pool south of that. Note the changing rooms in the centre of the picture. And just north of that, you can see the old Wandsworth Viaduct that lasted until the 1960s. Just above the viaduct, you can see the Wandsworth Stadium as well. If you look at the picture on the right, that is what it has become. Now the Wandle Recreation Centre. Five-a-side football, martial arts, jiu-jitsu, etc. But if you notice in the middle of above where the football pitches are, you will see that there are the changing rooms. They've been remodeled a little bit. Certainly the building in the middle is exactly the same building as was when it was Wandsworth Lido as well. Now, some of these other sports you may find a little bit upsetting. Their past and their present sports as well. This is prize fighting and gambling. Bunches Meadow in Pittsburgh was well known for prize fighting. Once bleaching fields for the textile industry. There was reports that's recorded in Eric Montagu's books on Mitcham of a report of a fight in 1931. Sunday morning, fight at 8:30. Ring of people, the police were powerless to actually do anything about it. There was betting on the fight, which was illegal, because regulated betting was only allowed on horse and greyhound racing. And they used to use bookmaker runners, which actually my cousin was involved in with my grandfather, but that's another story. Betting shops didn't actually come into place until 1961. In terms of cockfighting and coursing, the Greyhound Inn in Carshalton was well known for this and advertised lots of adverts for cockfighting and for coursing in the 18th century. And it dates back, in fact, to the pub until 1706. Now, ballooning was quite a popular sport around the end of the 1800s and the early 1900s. A popular launching place, in fact, was Wandsworth Gasworks, where balloons were quite often launched from the 1880s right up until 1910. In 1906, Leslie Backhall broke a long-distance record from Wandsworth. A postcard actually shows his times to Lake Geneva, which was 402 miles in 16 hours. In 1907, a balloon called Mammoth was 60 feet in diameter and carried 14 passengers. Frank Henry Butler, that you can actually see on the right-hand picture, he lived on West Hill in Wandsworth. He was involved with Hedges and Butler Whiskies, which I believe you can still get now. He was a balloonist and a pioneer for both flying and motoring. 1897, he was one of the first car owners. And in fact, he went on with his daughter and in fact to form their Aero Club. In 1905, he did the longest cross-channel single-handed balloon flight to Caen in France. Henry Tracy Coxwell intended to break the record from Wandsworth by reaching Russia, and he did a test run from Wandsworth. Now, hunting, mainly around the Carew Manor and grounds, now covered by Bellington Parks. The Carews obviously had a relationship with Henry VIII through Anne Boleyn and Jane Seymour, and he was very much a royal preserve, and poaching would have been completely frowned on. And also there was Wimbledon Palace and Park House going across the grounds that really now form Wimbledon Park as much as anything, and where the tennis courts are, etc. From Wimbledon Palace, very much down to the river, would have been a hunting ground, a smaller one. Now, otter hunting, some may find this upsetting. Otters hunted to stop fish being taken by the otters, and otter hunters were bred. These days, there's now only 600 left worldwide of otters. Otter hunting was actually banned only in 1981. So now it's disappeared, though the otter hound is still bred. Rat hunting. Well, what do you expect? Mills have rats, and they also have mice, in particular flour mills. Now, believe it or not, rat hunting is more humane than poisoning them. Still legal. It's not, you can go, if you want to, you can go rat hunting along the River Wandle. Don't get them confused with voles, though. They are very much a different type of animal. Voles do actually burrow and live on the river banks of the river, so don't get confused. Polo. Would you have thought polo would have been played along the banks of the River Wandle? Well, it was. Mr. Mendes, who lived in Wandle Park House in Collier's Wood, he introduced it in the 1900s, and he played and set up a polo park ground in the park for that time around near his house. Trotting, early 1900s again. This was at Wandle Grove. It's in fact near to the area and near to where the Hovey Sports Ground was that I showed you earlier. Wandle Grove was in fact occupied by Mr. Jenner. He laid out a track for trotting on his lawns at Mitcham Grove, which has since been demolished. The house was in fact just north of Hovey Sports Ground. At Garrett Park, shooting, Elsfield Rifle Club. It's now the Borough of Wandsworth Rifle Club in 1904. In fact, it was using dump land that had been infilled by the river, and is just southeast part of, excuse me, Garrett Park. It's still there today, and shooting still takes place there today. And if you look on most maps, you can actually trace the shooting club. Now, this is Garrett Park Cycle Speedway. Cycle Speedway was very popular, charging around on a bike without any brakes, putting your left foot down to turn around the corners. Cycle Speedway track at Garrett Park actually replaced a paddling pool in 1955. The first individual UK championships were held here in 1958. Teams included Tooting Tiger Clubs, Tooting Tigers, Tooting Wildcats, South London Rangers, South London Hunters, Wimbledon Rangers, with starting gates actually supplied by Whiteley's. The lads in the top right-hand corner there, in the centre, is actually 6-time world champion Ivan Major, Speedway champion, who rode for Ridley Stars in 1957-1958. As I say, these bikes had no brakes. The only thing they lacked was an engine, unlike the Speedway bikes that were 500cc and also had no brakes. But you certainly used your trade, learnt your trade to actually slide using Cycle Speedway. The Cycle Speedway track, in fact, is still there, though it was last formally used in 2002. Archery. Archery was a popular sport in Edwardian times. This shows it taking place in Beddington Park as a leisure activity. And I love the fact that the vicar is taking part in this with 4 ladies. So it must have been an interesting posed picture that they've actually got here of it. Also, we like to think of ladies cricket. Taking place is a much later sport, but this in fact is a picture from the 1950s of ladies cricket taking place again in Beddington Park. And Porter Park in Mitcham, our volunteer Roger actually remembers something very similar to the tug of war pole with heavy weights for practice. Here we've actually got a chap standing on it while the ladies try and pull and tug him up and lift him up above the poles in there. And certainly Roger remembers lacrosse taking place in the park as well. It was quite a common sight. This is Kimber Skate Park and BMX track. Opened in 2013, and it cost £170,000 to actually build. You know, it's a great increase in popularity since the last Olympics, in fact. Anyone have a skateboard or a BMX out there? Perhaps you remember. If you want to get back on it, you can always give the track a go. There's other things that are popular along the sport today is, of course, the Wandle Trail. Cycling is very popular. Walking along the river is very popular. Pedestrian walking used to be very competitive sport that took place along some bits of the river as well. Certainly, you could have a walking race along the River Wandle. Never know. Now, before we finish, I want to look lastly at Merton Priory and the sports of Royals. Possible sports that took place: archery, bowls, cough, which was an early form of golf, game ball, which is a simple football game, hammer throwing, shinty or hurling, similar to hockey, horseshoes, jousting competitions, wrestling, quarterstaff, skittles, stall ball, which was an ancestry of cricket. And they may not have all been played at Priory. Certainly some would have been played at the times of the King's visits. Edward III held a sporting celebration in 1347 after the Battle of Crecy at Merton Priory. Henry II and Henry IV also used the Priory along with Edward I. And it's quite likely they would have had jousting competitions there as well, as such. Certainly there would have been, I'm sure, sports taking place at times of the King's visits, whichever king it was. That brings us to the end of this presentation. I'd like to thank Wandsworth, Merton and Sutton Heritage Services for the use of their photographs. And should you have any questions, then please either email the museum, we'll be happy to answer them, or you can contact us by telephone. Best time to do that is on a Wednesday afternoon. And I hope you enjoyed that presentation, and thank you for listening.